Oh, let me pull up here PowerPoint. And here we go.
Okay. And then you're going to get there you go.
All right. Forward.
Okay.
There you go.
Forward, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks. All right. So I want everybody to pay attention to this screen here because I get a lot of questions about these very fundamental issues as it relates to the type of benefits that people can receive: Medicare, Medicaid, disability insurance benefits, and SSI. I get a lot of questions about, well, what is SSI? What is disability insurance benefits? If I get a settlement on my personal injury claim for my client, is it going to affect their SSI? And that's a very common question. Well, SSI means supplemental security income. It's a type of benefit that's based on financial need. And so what this means is that a person can be eligible for SSI if they have reduced assets and also limited income. And SSI is not disability insurance benefits. It's not SSDI and it's not RSDI. So there's two main types: disability insurance benefits, also known as Title II, and sometimes people call that SSDI or RSDI. The second main type is supplemental security income, also known as Title 16. This is based on assets and based on income. And this is a really key and important point. SSI relates to Medicaid. Disability insurance benefits, or what some people call SSDI or RSDI, relates to Medicare. And if a person's eligible for SSI, supplemental security income, they're not eligible for Medicare, they're eligible for Medicaid. And the way that you're going to remember this, and I brought this, I stole this from my cat. The way you're going to remember this is the I in SSI relates to Medicaid, the I in aid. So that's your mnemonic to remember that. I hope it's not quite in there. So what do? I help people get their Social Security disability benefits. I work in the largest adjudicatory system in the world. It is a remedial and a non-adversarial process. Sarah's already laughing. That means there's no other side. There's no attorney representing the government. The administrative law judge kind of wears three hats. They're the neutral arbiter of fact. They are the person that's ultimately responsible for developing the record. And that's with the claimant represented or not. And that's kind of a unique aspect of this, but you can talk to me about that later if you have any questions. But they're also kind of there to defend the government. There was a judge that I used to appear before probably for 15, 18 years. And he said, you know, James, I'm here kind of to make sure the government gets a fair deal, which is interesting because the government has all the resources in the world. They have a printing press. They have a system in place where they don't have anything at stake. You know, most of you work in a process like at MAL, personal injury, workers' comp, and there's somebody representing the other side. And there's incentive. There's incentive to resolve cases, to do things that make sense. There's a cost benefit analysis in that. There's not with Social Security. Social Security looks at the issue and just says, if we get there, we get there. If we don't, we don't. And it's kind of sad because what happens is you have some people that fight for benefits for 3 years, 5 years, or 9 years. I had a case from beginning to end that went 11 years. I had a case one time that went for 14 years. It got remanded 4 times from the federal court. I've had people die in the process. And the thing is that Social Security has all the resources in the world. You know, you go up against insurance companies, they have revenues of what, 7, 8, 900 billion. Social Security, they have whatever it takes. And they just simply don't care about the process. The other thing is that our adversary, and that's the way that I look at it, is they have a military. You know, there's an Air Force and an Army. They have nuclear weapons. And, you know, I see some people chuckling about that. But the fact is that Social Security brings these resources to bear. And it's difficult to get them to negotiate with anything. But when I file a claim for disability, when people pursue disability, sometimes people wonder, well, what is that? You know, what are you filing disability for? It's for all of the orthopedic or neurological problems that people have, all the head injuries that people sustain in a personal injury. It's for physical problems that people have, but it's more than just the kinds of conditions that people might suffer from an accident. It's heart conditions, it's obesity, it's cancer, it's rheumatological issues. It's anything that could prevent you from working on a 8 hour a day, 5 day a week basis for at least a 12-month continuous period. There's also mental aspects to this too. So a person can have disability based on mental problems as well. Depression, anxiety are common ones, but there's also conditions like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, autism, and intellectual disability. And somewhat interestingly and ironically, that's one that Social Security fights really hard on. You have people in our society who, you know, that's the lot that they drew in life. That's the way that they were born. You know, I would imagine that most people in this room probably have an IQ that's 2 standard deviations above the mean, at least 130 above, 130 IQ points. That's what the estimate is for a person to even pass the bar exam. And that's 2 standard deviations above the mean, which means that you're in the 98th percentile. So a person to establish disability for an intellectual problem has to demonstrate that they have an IQ that's 2 standard deviations below the mean. In other words, an IQ of 70 or lower, and that's 2% of our population. And Social Security digs in hard on those people, which is just shocking and incredible. All right, I'm going to see if I can get this to work. So everybody got a picture of that, and thanks for listening on that. So fraud, and I didn't think that was going to be big enough, but I'm going to read this to you and read to you just the definition, the basic definition of fraud. Any intentional deception designed to unlawfully deprive the government of something of value or to secure from the government for an individual benefit, privilege, allowance, or consideration to which he or she is not entitled. So this requires a little bit of audience participation. Is there fraud in Social Security disability? Yep. There's fraud in every system. There isn't a system that's immune to the fact that there's people that want to take advantage of it. I need a show of hands from people. Well, actually, what I want to do is I want to ask, we know that there's fraud in Social Security. And I want people to be reasonably cynical about just how much fraud that there is in Social Security. So if somebody could tell us what percentage of people who are getting Social Security disability are getting it fraudulently. And by the way, there's somewhere between 10 and 11 million people on Social Security disability at any given time. And that's direct and indirect beneficiaries. So what percentage of that 10 to 11 million people are receiving Social Security disability fraudulently? They've done something illegal. Somebody throw out a number.
2%.
2%? 0.2%. Anybody else? 10? 10%? Okay. I appreciate you doing that. You might be 100 times too high. And so I want to click on to the next slide here. So how are we going to fix this? If we have that many people that are getting benefits fraudulently, 10% of that 10 to 11 million people, that's a lot of people. So how do we fix it? Some people think that this is the solution, is to go after the program. And you've seen this effort in this attempt. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. I have other ideas and names for it. Department of Government Evil, Evasiveness, Emptiness, Embarrassment, Errors. The objective of DOGE originally was to try to save $2 trillion out of a roughly $6.75 trillion budget. Anybody know how much it actually saved, or how much it claims it saved?
They kept changing the website.
They, Well, the number that I know about is 150 to 180 billion allegedly. And this is about 6 to 8% of the original goal and 6 to 8% of the original claim. And a big part of that was going to be Social Security. This is 2.2%. If you believe the $150 billion number, it's 2.2% of the overall federal budget. So who let the doge out? I hope this works. It's supposed to be a video. Derek,
Oh, you probably hit button again.
did it again?
Oh, here. Let's see. There we go.
Vaccine small more bureaucracy. Good soul.
Does it only play one time?
Please.
Yeah. I was gonna play it 3 or 4 times. So why him? Smart guy? Billionaire? Maybe it has something to do with the $275 million that he contributed to Trump and the Republicans. Do you remember what you thought about what the percentage of people that are on Social Security are getting it fraudulently, percentage-wise? I think it was 10%, and I'm glad you gave me that number. That's the actual number. And there's some statistics in the materials that we gave you, and it takes a little bit of defining from it. But take a look at that, and you're going to see that there's very little fraud in Social Security disability. But that's not what we're led to believe. We're led to believe, and the mantra is that this is the reason why we have deficits in our country. This is the reason why our country is failing, is because you have people on Social Security disability, and everybody knows that everybody on Social Security disability is on it fraudulently. The number of 0.1 is about 11,000 people if we assume 11 million people on disability. The number of 0.01 is about 1,100 people. Trump just pardoned a couple that committed Medicare fraud. And I believe that they had committed Medicare fraud to the tune of $250 million. And he pardoned them both. They had both gotten indicted and convicted. And they were incarcerated, husband and wife team. Here's another way to say this. 99.9 to 99.99% of the people that Social Security decides are disabled are on it legitimately. And this is through decisions at the lower levels or adjudicated at a hearing level where I do most of my work. And that's an impressive number. That's amazing that any system can be that accurate. Does anybody here run a law firm or run their personal life with 99.99% efficiencies? It just doesn't happen. I mean, we all woke up this morning, so we can all say we woke up in our heartbeat and we're breathing, so that's 100%. That's an impressive number for a reason, and you kind of got to get behind the number a little bit. Social Security doesn't cast a wide enough net. It might surprise you that with the number of people on disability at a given time, 11 million people, we're talking about 2.2 to 3.8% of the population, something like that. That you'd think that, wow, that's too many people. That's a lot of people on Social Security disability. But part of the problem is that Social Security doesn't include enough people on Social Security disability. They don't follow their own rules a lot of the time. That's where kind of Brian Konoski, who's an attorney that I met, and you're going to meet in just a minute, and he's listening in right now. We always did federal work. I've done Social Security federal work for a couple of decades. But Brian contacted me and asked me to refer him cases. And you're going to be kind of surprised at the number of cases that go to federal court. And I'm going to not steal his thunder, but it turns out that that's what you really need to find Social Security disability fraud. That's the instrument right there. And arguably, that's overkill to try to cut away the fat from Social Security disability. certainly isn't a chainsaw. And you get people like Elon Musk attempting to try to go out there and promote this idea that Social Security disability is a fraudulent system. And they're really successful at it. There's a lot of cynicism about Social Security, even with the ALJs that I appeared before. And that's a whole nother story we don't have enough time for. But what I'm suggesting is that, and this is supposed to be a video too, Derek, I don't know if it'll play. But what I'm suggesting is that people like Elon Musk.
For SpaceX, yet another spectacular setback. This one caught on camera by space enthusiasts in Texas. Oh my God. The uncrewed mega rocket exploding during a static rocket ground test. SpaceX described the explosion as a major anomaly while preparing for a test flight later this month. No injuries, though local residents posted on social media that the blast shook their homes. Standing nearly.
So enough of that, but how about this? I made sure nobody was hurt in this incident because I know this is going to be a serious matter, not a joking. That's a Tesla. And by the way, I own a Tesla, probably the most reliable car I've ever owned. I love it. I just don't like the guy who made it. But what I would suggest is that people like Elon Musk go back and do what they do. You do, Elon. You go back and get in your lane. And figure out that self-driving technology that you've been promising us for 10 years. So I think we'll move on to something else here. So look, there's a process in Social Security disability, and some of you may be familiar with it from admin law in school, or just kind of obliquely aware of what the process is. But here's and I thought that this would happen. I thought that we wouldn't be able to see this on the screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk you through it real quick. So this is a waterfall chart, and it's 2024. It shows the number of people that have filed for Social Security disability, and that's right at the top here. It's about I wrote this down. It's going to be easier for me to read it because I can't see that small print. It's about 2.1 million people that filed for disability in 2024. Okay, and at the initial level, about 62% of all people were denied. So you're talking about you're talking about 600,000 or 700,000 people. Well, actually more than that. 1.2 million people that were denied. 1.294 million people that were denied. 38% of those people appealed to what's called reconsideration. And at reconsideration, 84% of all people were denied. And this is just an administrative process where they just look at the paper, they just compile the evidence, and they take a look at whether a person meets the criteria, and it's very strict. There's some rules that apply, and it gets a little beyond the scope of this presentation. But of the 84% of the people that are denied, you're looking at about 299, we'll call it 300,000 people last year that went to a hearing with the judge nationwide. And about 51% of those people were allowed. 33% were denied. And of those 33% of the people that were denied, we're talking about 45,000 people that went to the appeals council. The appeals council denies almost everything. It's just simply a rubber stamp. And about 90% of all people are denied at the appeals council. And then we go to federal court after that. There were about 15,000 people who filed federal court complaints last year in 2024. And that's down from traditionally, it's usually somewhere between 18 and 20,000 nationwide. And that kind of brings me to Brian's role in all of this. As I indicated, he had contacted me about 4 years ago, and he's, I guess he's what I would kind of consider the Steve Terry East Coast doppelganger. And he practiced criminal law, and he did about 50 homicide cases, apparently to full verdict. And he decided that he's going to do Social Security disability. So he contacted me, and it's been a pretty good partnership. And so what he's going to do is he's going to get up here and he's going to speak about what he sees in the practice coming from a completely different area of the law, and what he sees about the unique aspects of the Social Security disability practice in federal court. So yeah, it's good.
Just give me a moment here. Get rid of this. Great. Here we go. Right. I think we're good. Brian?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. There we go.
All right. Thanks. So, hi, everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I'm glad that I can join everybody by Zoom. Unfortunately, the powers that be would not let me get to Minnesota for this conference, even though I was scheduled to be there. I wound up getting on and then departing 2 separate planes and spent 8 hours at the airport in Newark, and it just wasn't happening. They wind up canceling my flight after spending all that time there. So here I am by Zoom. And you just heard James. He was talking to you a bit about Social Security. And as you heard a little bit, I handle Social Security disability cases as well, but I don't do them at the administrative level. I handle them at the federal district court level exclusively. I handle cases nationwide, not just in New York and New Jersey, which is where I am now, but I handle them in Minnesota. I handle them all across the country. Now, you heard James, he told you that Social Security is a non-adversarial proceeding, and that's true, but that doesn't mean it's easy. And that's non-adversarial at the administrative level. At my level, it is actually adversarial. I get an opponent. I get a member from Department of Justice or Office of General Counsel who is my opponent, and they, of course, defend against the case. But just because it's non-adversarial doesn't mean it's easy. In fact, the statistics show that it's actually very difficult to win a case. But you also heard from James, he talked a little bit about fraud in the system. And he asked by a show of hands who thought how much fraud there was in the system. I know one person said 10%, another person estimated about 0.2%. But the fraud is not systemic in Social Security. It's a complete misconception. You would believe that it's rather systemic based on what you hear in the news and the angle you get in the news, but it is not. And if you're wondering, how could that be? We hear so much about it. It has to be systemic. Why else would they say it's systemic? Why would they talk to us about it like that if it wasn't? But there's a way you can easily tell it's not systemic. And that's at the Social Security disability level. There are experts that give opinions. There's state agency doctors hired by the Social Security Administration. There's consultative examiners hired by the Social Security Administration. And sometimes there's expert witnesses hired to testify by the Social Security Administration, all of which are paid for by the government to independently review the medical records. So you have layers of experts, and you don't get a paid expert in a Social Security case. You may be able to get your doctor to fill out a form if you're lucky, if the doctor will even do it. But unlike, let's say, a personal injury case where you get your hired gun, so to speak, and the defense gets their hired gun and everybody kind of disputes over, which doctor is correct or not. You don't get that at this level. So what you get are doctors hired by the government who you have to try to persuade an ALJ that those doctors actually support a finding of disability. It's kind of hard to say that there's systemic fraud in a system where you have potentially 2, 3, 4, 5 expert witnesses hired by the government. And then you have the news with, politicians saying how much fraud there is in the system, but they don't tell you about how many expert witnesses they hire to review a case before it's approved. You can't possibly, it's just illogical to think you could have that many expert witnesses on a case, but systemic fraud all across the country. Just, it doesn't happen. But there is a systemic problem. And it's not the fraud. What the systemic problem is how often the Social Security Administration gets it wrong. And it is staggering. So I'm going to start right here in Minnesota, just for an example. And our firm's win rate on federal cases across the nation is about 70%. So out of, let's say, all the cases we review, we accept probably what I would consider a staggering number of cases, because a lot of practitioners who accept cases don't accept quite the percentage that we do. And we will accept probably about 40% of all cases we review. Out of those, we're winning 70% across the nation. To put that in perspective, that means that the government is getting it wrong just an exorbitant amount of times. Exorbitant. I'm winning 70% out of accepting 40%. And that doesn't mean the other 60% don't have a case. A chunk of them probably do have a case, but practically speaking, you can't take every case to federal court. Practically speaking, you have associate counsel that you have to pay for, and just not every case has the teeth to it, so to speak, to justify the cost of running the practice with the case. I mean, that's just the practical realities of it. So not every case gets through our screening process, even if there might be a colorable case. So take that all into account. We're accepting 40%, but there may be more than that actually theoretically have colorable cases. But here in Minnesota, we're winning, getting remands back for new hearing in 56% of the cases. That was our 2024 statistic. Our 2024 statistic nationwide was 70%. And this is an interesting fact because it shows you that in federal court, you've got the same exact law. It should be viewed the same exact way. Same law, same federal system, but different results. And in some jurisdictions, for instance, New Jersey, Utah, Southern District of Indiana, 2024, we won 100% of our cases. In others, let's say Eastern District of Arkansas, which I think is the worst in the nation that we've seen, 25% win rate. Now, how in the world do you have these vastly different percentages in this system? We're not taking different issues. It's the same issues. They're perceived differently, different judges, different outcomes. And my point is this: cases are treated drastically different across the country, despite the fact that federal law is technically supposed to be uniform. But this is a serious problem, and it's one that goes to the very heart of what I've spent my career doing in one way or another, and that's holding the government accountable. And before I handled Social Security, you heard a little bit about what I did before. I was a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan. I tried more than 60 cases to verdict, handled more than 50 homicide cases. And in that world, the stakes are obvious. My client's liberty was on the line. In criminal defense, the fight is against prosecutors who have to who sometimes cut corners or ignore evidence or withhold evidence or overcharge. In disability appeals, still holding the government accountable. The fight is now against an agency that sometimes refuses to acknowledge its own mistakes, or stands behind an administrative law judge's denials despite a very obvious disability, or where the ALJ simply got it wrong and the government still backs up their ALJ. They represent a client, they represent the government, and it doesn't matter whether the client is disabled or not, they're going to stand behind their ALJ. Now, while these two practice areas may seem vastly different, and in fact they are in a lot of ways very different, they have one thing in common, and that's in both areas, in both arenas, an unchecked government power can absolutely ruin lives. I mean, it's unquestionable that in the criminal defense arena, if somebody's wrongfully convicted, they're going to spend quite a lot of time in prison. And that is, of course, unjust. It's a tragedy in and of itself. But in the Social Security system, it's equally tragic if the government gets it wrong. I mean, you have a situation where if the government gets it wrong, you have people that rely on that money. Nobody is getting rich off of Social Security benefits. Nobody. The benefits just are not enough money for anybody to get rich off of it. But what people do is they rely on it to pay for basic necessities. They have to pay for their food. They have to pay for their shelter. It's their everyday living expenses that they're really trying to get by on. And without it, they could be homeless. They don't know what to do with themselves. They don't know where their next meal is coming from. But also what's tied to Social Security benefits is health care. And while some people may not get money to pay for their food, their shelter, there are very much times where the tragedy is even deeper than that and where people die during the course of a case. And I'm not being dramatic about that. I've had numerous cases where a claimant who was wrongfully denied benefits died during federal appeal. So, and you know they're wrongfully denied benefits because I've had the cases remanded where they actually won post-mortem. And that is a tragedy because what would have been the outcome had they been approved like they should have been the first time around and received the very medical benefits that they were supposed to get? So it's very important that everybody understands the importance of this. These are not small cases. Yes, in terms of dollars and cents, they're small compared to some major personal injury cases that are out there. But in terms of the impact on these claimants' lives, it is exponentially important. And you know, there is a flaw in the Social Security process as well, and that's that. Let's say you go through all these levels of appeal, and the ALJ and the Appeals Council, right, the last level of appeal in the administrative process, are all part of the same agency. And James told you earlier that the Appeals Council just rubber stamps cases. They rubber stamp denials. And this, in my view, is actually very true. Statistically, but maybe 10%, maybe less, depends on the year, right? Let's say about ballpark 10% of Appeals Council appeals are remanded for a new hearing. That means 90% of them get through. I'm accepting 40% of what I'm reviewing. I'm taking them to federal court and getting remands on 70% of them. I'm getting voluntary remands. I think 2024, my voluntary remand rate was about 40% across the nation. I think it's about a third out of Minnesota. What a voluntary remand is, for those of you who don't know, is when the government concedes and they say, okay, fine, you filed your brief. We agree the case should go back for a new hearing. So it doesn't have to get decided by a judge. I guess that's as close to a settlement as you're going to get in the Social Security system. And these cases, they get remanded, but the interesting thing about it is that the Appeals Council who denied the case refused to remand it, then agrees to remand it. And you know this because the Social Security's lawyers, my adversaries, because it's no longer non-adversarial, I have to deal with an opponent. My opponent has a client. I have a client. That's the claimant. They have a client. That's the government. And who they answer to is the Appeals Council. In order to agree to a remand, they have to contact their client, the Appeals Council, and give advice on whether or not the case should be remanded. And the Appeals Council agrees. That's how it gets back to a remand from the federal level on a voluntary remand. And that's extraordinarily interesting. And it really just kind of raises more of a question as to the systemic problems that I was talking about earlier. Because if the Appeals Council knew that the case needed to be remanded and agreed with their attorneys at the federal level that the case needed to be remanded, well, why wasn't it remanded 6 months, a year before? Why? Why does it have to get to me for me to fight this good fight up at the federal level to get it remanded for a new hearing? And the other statistics to show that this is a systemic problem is it's not just getting remanded at this federal level and it goes back and they just get denied again because they got denied before. It goes back And the national statistic is about 2/3 of those cases that are remanded from the federal court are eventually won. And that also shows just what a horrible outcome it is when these judges make mistakes. And it shows that these cases are chock full of just systemic mistakes. And yet we hear on the news all the time that we're hearing about how there's all this fraud in the system, but nobody wants to talk about all the mistakes and all the people that are wrongfully denied and the people that die during the course of a case that shouldn't have had to. We don't hear about that. So really, at the end of the day, you know, people ask me why switch from criminal to Social Security, and there are a lot of reasons, and I could sit here for a long time and discuss all of them.
Switching from criminal to Social Security. Start that over, because I think I'll report.
Oh, so I switched from you know, Social Security, from criminal to Social Security, and you know, people ask, you know, why or how, why did I make that decision? And I could sit here and I could talk about it for a while, you know, about the different reasons, and but you know, it sounds like it's a really different switch. It sounds like, I mean, criminal, it comes with good party stories. And I could sit here and talk about my experience as a criminal attorney and handling homicide cases, you know, all day long. And it may be a lot more interesting to everybody to hear about that than to hear about how I sat and I typed up a legal brief today. But the truth of the matter is that the importance of what I'm doing, it's just as important to all of my clients, if not more so. They have families that are relying on them that are not in custody. They have families that they have to take care of that are not in custody. And the outcome of these cases is extraordinarily important. And I know that we're coming to an end here in a few moments, but you know, it's important to hold the government accountable in these cases. And for those of you who handle Social Security, and I'm sure that there's some of you that handle some, just because you lose at the administrative level doesn't mean that's the end of the case. It doesn't mean that, you know, the book should be closed on that case. It's important to proceed as far as you can. And for those of you who don't handle Social Security, you really need to think about what happens to a client who's involved in an accident or has a workers' comp claim. Are you thinking about the Social Security aspect of the case? Because it does impact them. It has a component of health insurance involved. It has a component of monthly benefits that they rely on. And if you don't handle cases like that, you really need to keep an open mind to these things because it impacts people's lives. And if you're not handling those cases, you should really consider sending them out to attorneys that do handle it. And I don't handle cases at the administrative level at all, but Mr. Greeman does. And for all purposes, you should really consider reaching out to him. But if anybody here has any questions now, I know it's almost 4:30 now, but I'm happy to answer any questions. So I do appreciate everybody's time.
Thank you.
Power. Because it's
I
an
like that.
ongoing struggle. A lot of people in the room are used to that, but I was wondering if you could comment on how you deal with that when largely my understanding is at the federal level, the record is closed. It's based on whatever has happened before. So how are you combating that imbalance of power where they've had, 6, 7 experts, and then we have maybe 2, 3 at the most treating source statements?
My answer is keep fighting. Brian, did you hear that question?
I did. Yeah, you have to keep fighting at the federal level. So I think there's a belief that at the federal level, you have to show that your client is disabled at the federal level, and you're combating against proof that shows the claimant may not be disabled, and an ALJ who found the claimant's not disabled. I don't attack it on that angle. I attack it on legalities. The ALJ did something wrong. My job at the federal level is not to prove that the claimant is disabled. That's Mr. Greeman's job. My job at the federal level is to get the case back into Mr. Greeman's hands or your hands, for instance. and get it back into your hands so that you can prove the case back up. And I do that however I can on
Sorry.
showing a legal error. And when you get it back into your hands, by the time it gets back into your hands, we're talking 6 months later, a year later, claimants rarely get better. They usually get worse. So by the time it gets back into your hands, there's probably additional conditions, and you're not limited to the issues raised at federal court. Reprove the case up. Start it from scratch. If I get it back into your hands, you're not limited. Start again. Start it from the beginning. You can definitely turn the case back around.
Okay, Brian, that's your closing. So I think that well, it mostly worked.
Yeah.
Thanks, James.